The finality of the room was absolute. It was a space designed for endings, all muted grays and the scent of expensive paper and regret. Liam sat on a chair that cost more than his first car, its leather cool and indifferent against his back. Across the polished mahogany table, his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, Isabella, radiated a triumphant glow. Her victory was a palpable thing, an aura that warmed her, made her smile brighter, her posture more regal. Beside her, her father, Richard Thorne, looked like a Roman emperor surveying a conquered province. His suit was a fortress of tailored wool, his silver hair a helmet of authority. He had the satisfied look of a man who had just proven, once again, that the world operated exactly as he believed it should. The powerful win, the weak are ground into dust. And in his eyes, Liam was nothing more than dust. The lawyer, a man named Sterling whose face was a collection of sharp, predatory angles, shuffled the last of the documents. And with that, Sterling announced, his voice smooth and final, "The dissolution of the marriage is complete. All assets, as per the prenuptial agreement and subsequent mediation, are allocated as stipulated." Allocated was a gentle word for it. Annihilated was closer to the truth of Liam's situation. Isabella got the house, the sprawling architectural marvel that Liam had, ironically, helped design in the early, hopeful days of their marriage. She got the art collection, the investment portfolios, the cars. She got the life they had built, or rather, the life her father's money had built and which she had curated. Liam was allocated his personal belongings, a few boxes of books, his worn drafting tools, a decade-old sedan, and a one-time lump sum that was, by Richard Thorne's standards, little more than walking around money. It was enough to keep him from being legally destitute, and therefore, enough to satisfy the court's sense of fairness. It was a pittance designed as a final, crushing insult. "Well," Isabella said, standing and smoothing down her immaculate dress. She looked at Liam, not with malice, but with the kind of detached pity one might reserve for a stray dog. "I do hope you land on your feet, Liam." Truly, the words were perfect, a flawless performance of magnanimity. But her eyes told the real story. They were bright with the thrill of the win, of having successfully shed the dead weight she felt he had become. Richard didn't bother with such niceties. He clapped his lawyer on the shoulder, a gesture of shared victory between two members of the same winning tribe. A necessary unpleasantness, efficiently handled, he boomed, his voice filling the sterile room. He glanced at Liam, a flicker of contempt in his gaze. "It's for the best. Isabella needs a partner, not a project." Liam felt the familiar sting of the insult, a sensation he had grown accustomed to over the past few years. He had endured countless dinners where his quiet nature was mistaken for a lack of intelligence, where his modest career as a freelance architectural consultant was openly mocked in comparison to the corporate titans and hedge fund managers in Isabella's circle. He had been the sensitive one, the artistic one, a charming but ultimately impractical accessory that had lost its novelty. He had swallowed their condescension, their casual dismissals, their thinly veiled scorn, all for the sake of a love he now realized had been a mirage. He said nothing. He simply nodded, his expression placid. Inside, a strange calm had settled over him. It was the calm of a ship that has weathered the worst of a storm and now sits in the eerie stillness of the eye. He had held his breath for so long, bracing for this impact, and now that it had come, it was almost a relief. He had let them believe what they wanted to believe. He had let them see a man who was broken, diminished, and defeated. They thought they knew him. They thought they had seen his full measure and found it wanting. Within the next 30 minutes, they would learn that the man they had just discarded was not a project, but the architect of an empire they couldn't even fathom. They had just finished judging the cover of a book whose first chapter they hadn't even been allowed to read. It's a funny thing, isn't it? The assumptions we make about people. We see a quiet man and think he's weak. We see a simple life and think it's a small one. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever had to bite your tongue while someone else wrote your story for you, then you know the feeling I'm talking about. Stick with me for a bit, because we're about to see what happens when the quiet man finally decides to speak. And hey, if you're enjoying this, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so drop a comment down below. Now, let's get back to that parking lot. Liam picked up the single, thin folder that contained his copies of the divorce decree. It was a flimsy record of a decade of his life, reduced to legal jargon and signatures. He didn't look at Isabella or her father as he walked towards the door. He could feel their eyes on his back, their shared sense of closure. They were already moving on, their minds on lunch reservations at a restaurant where the wine list started at 3 figures. Liam, Isabella's voice called out, stopping him at the door. He turned. Her expression had a hint of genuine curiosity now, the kind a biologist might have for a particularly uninteresting specimen. What will you do now? Where will you even go? The question hung in the air, laden with the unstated truth. You have nothing. You're nothing without me. Liam allowed a small, tired smile to touch his lips. It was the first genuine expression they had seen from him all day. I have arrangements, he said softly. The answer was so simple, so devoid of the anger or despair they expected, that it seemed to confuse them. Richard grunted, interpreting it as the pathetic bravado of a defeated man. Arrangements, he scoffed under his breath to Sterling, who smirked in reply. Liam stepped out of the office and into the long, carpeted hallway. The silence was a blessing. He walked past framed prints of abstract art, past closed doors behind which other lives were being quietly dismantled or defended. He didn't rush. His steps were measured, deliberate. Each one took him further from the life he had been living and closer to the life that had been waiting for him all along. He reached the elevator and pressed the button. As he waited, he pulled a small, worn leather-bound journal and a silver fountain pen from the inside pocket of his simple tweed jacket. The jacket was old, comfortable, and to the Thorns, a clear sign of his lack of success. To Liam, it was just a jacket. He opened the journal to a blank page. For years, this little book had been his sanctuary. While Isabella and her family discussed stock prices and social calendars, Liam would sit quietly, sketching. They thought he was doodling, zoning out. They had no idea he was designing hydroelectric dams, planning logistics for international shipping ports, and sketching the initial concepts for skyscrapers that were now reshaping skylines on 3 different continents. They saw a hobbyist. The world saw the work of the mysterious, brilliant, and pathologically private founder of the Ethelred Consortium, a man known in the highest circles of engineering and finance only by his first initial, L. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Liam stepped inside, the cool metal walls a welcome change from the oppressive warmth of the law office. As the doors slid shut, he was alone with his reflection. The man looking back at him was tired, yes, but his eyes were clear. The weight that had hunched his shoulders for years was gone. He felt light. The ride down was silent. He didn't think about Isabella. He didn't think about Richard. He thought about the complex stress load calculations for the new suspension bridge in a developing nation his firm was funding as a philanthropic venture. He thought about the elegant, sweeping lines of the public library he was designing for a city that had lost its own in a fire. He thought about the work. The work had always been his salvation. It was pure, logical, and honest. It was everything his marriage had not been. The elevator opened onto the sterile grandeur of the building's main lobby. Marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting. A security guard at a large, imposing desk nodded at him. Liam nodded back. He walked towards the revolving glass doors, the city noise gradually growing louder. He pushed through the doors and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. He took a deep breath, the city air filling his lungs, a mix of exhaust fumes, roasting nuts from a street vendor, and the clean scent of the wind coming off the nearby harbor. It smelled like freedom. He started walking towards the vast, multi-level parking garage across the street, his old sedan parked somewhere in its concrete depths. He heard footsteps hurrying behind him and knew, without looking, who it was. Liam, wait. It was Isabella. He stopped but didn't turn. He heard the click-clack of her expensive heels on the pavement as she caught up to him. Her father was right behind her, his heavy, confident strides echoing hers. "We're heading to the Caspian for lunch," she said, a little breathless. "To celebrate, well, to mark the occasion. I wanted to offer, you can join us." "My treat." Liam finally turned to face her. The offer was staggering in its arrogance. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a final assertion of her power, of her status as the benefactor and him the supplicant. It was an offer to buy him one last meal, a final act of charity. "No, thank you, Isabella," he said, his voice even. Richard stepped forward, his shadow falling over Liam. "Don't be a fool, boy. It's a good meal. Take the handout. It's more than you deserve after holding my daughter back for 10 years. This was the moment, the culmination of 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 moments of quiet humiliation. The dinner parties, the snide remarks, the condescending pats on the back. He remembered one night, a year ago, at a gala for the Thorne Family's Foundation. Liam had been trying to explain a concept for sustainable urban housing to one of Richard's associates, sketching it on a napkin. Richard had walked over, glanced at the drawing, and laughed. "Still drawing your little dream houses, Liam," he'd said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "Some men build empires. Others doodle." He'd then crumpled the napkin and tossed it aside, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. Now, standing on the pavement, Liam felt the memory of that crumpled napkin. He looked at Richard's smug, florid face. He looked at Isabella, who was already looking at her watch, her act of charity having reached its time limit. And then he heard it. It started as a low, deep thrumming, a rhythmic whump 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 that was more felt than heard. It grew steadily, a sound completely alien to the urban symphony of car horns and sirens. It was the sound of immense power, gracefully controlled. Isabella frowned, annoyed by the interruption. "What is that noise?" Richard looked up at the sky, his hand shielding his eyes from the sun. "Some kind of medical transport, probably," he muttered, dismissing it. But the sound grew louder, closer, vibrating in Liam's chest. He didn't look up. He kept his eyes on Isabella. A slow smile spread across his face. It wasn't the tired, sad smile from before. This one was different. It held a hint of mischief, a glint of the triumphant satisfaction he had denied himself for so long. "That," Liam said, his voice cutting through the growing roar of the rotors, "is my arrangement." The helicopter, a sleek, dark gray Augusta Westland AW109, was now descending towards the open top level of the parking garage across the street. It was a machine of breathtaking beauty and power, the kind of vehicle that announced the arrival of someone who didn't just operate in the world but actively shaped it. Isabella and Richard stared, their mouths slightly agape. Their minds struggled to connect the sight of this multi-million-dollar aircraft with the man standing before them in a worn tweed jacket. The connection was impossible. It didn't compute. "That's very funny, Liam," Isabella said, her voice tight with irritation. "Making jokes at a time like this. It's pathetic." "Is it?" Liam asked. He reached into his jacket again, but this time he didn't pull out his journal. He pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once. Across the street, the helicopter, which had been hovering, began its final, precise descent, landing gently on a designated spot on the top deck of the garage, a spot that was, by a remarkable coincidence, right next to Liam's beat-up sedan. The rotors began to slow. A side door slid open, and a woman in a sharply tailored suit stepped out, ducking her head slightly. She was followed by two men in similar attire. Even from this distance, they moved with an air of quiet, formidable competence. Liam's phone rang. He answered it, putting on speaker. "We're on the ground, Mr. L," a crisp, professional female voice said. "Ready when you are. Ms. Reed sends her apologies. Her plane was delayed, but she'll meet you at the site this afternoon." Liam looked at Isabella. Her face was a mask of disbelief. Richard's face had gone from smug to confused to a dark, mottled red of dawning fury. "Thank you, Anya," Liam said into the phone. "I'm on my way up, just saying a final goodbye." He hung up. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. He looked at the two people who had defined and confined his life for the last decade. Their world, a world built on the simple, brutal arithmetic of wealth and status, was beginning to crumble around them because the numbers suddenly didn't add up. Mr. L. Isabella whispered, the name echoing in the space between them. She had heard that name before. Everyone in their circle had. Mr. L was a ghost, a myth, the shadowy, reclusive genius behind the Ethelred Consortium, the fastest-growing and most innovative architectural and engineering firm in the world. A firm Richard Thorne had been desperately and unsuccessfully trying to court for a massive development project, a project that would save his own aging company from obsolescence. He had been complaining for months about being unable to even get a meeting, blocked by a formidable executive named Evelyn Reed. Liam's gaze was gentle, but his words were devastating. "They're a bit formal at the office," he said with a slight shrug. "I prefer Liam." The statement landed in the space between them with the force of a physical blow. It was a key turning a lock, and a dozen different doors in Isabella's memory were suddenly flung open. The late nights Liam spent doodling in his journal. The calls he would take at odd hours, speaking in quiet, technical terms she dismissed as freelance nonsense. His strange lack of concern about money. His quiet confidence that she had always mistaken for weakness. It had all been a lie. Or rather, her entire understanding of her own life had been a lie. Richard Thorne took a staggering step back, his face ashen. He looked from Liam to the helicopter, then back to Liam. The doodles on a napkin at the gala. Was it possible that it had been a preliminary sketch for the new Singapore waterfront, a multi-billion-dollar project Ethelred had one a few months later? The thought was so horrifying, so utterly world-shattering, that he couldn't breathe. He had not just insulted his son-in-law. He had potentially insulted one of the most powerful and anonymous figures in his own industry. He hadn't just crumpled a napkin. He had crumpled a king's missive. "You," Richard sputtered, pointing a trembling finger. "You're him? But your car, your clothes, your life." "I found it was easier to focus on the work without the distractions," Liam said simply. "I like my car. It's reliable. I like this jacket. It's comfortable. The rest was for Isabella. I thought it was what she wanted. A simple life. A partner who was present." He looked at his ex-wife, and for the first time, she saw not a defeated man, but a titan who had been willingly living in a dollhouse that was far too small for him. "It seems I miscalculated." Isabella finally found her voice, a choked, desperate sound. "You let me do this? You let me divorce you? You let me take everything?" Her voice broke on the last word. The house, the art, the money, it was all his. Not hers, not her father's. His. She hadn't taken his assets. He had gifted her a fraction of his pocket change. The humiliation was so profound, so absolute, it was like drowning. "I didn't let you do anything, Isabella," Liam corrected her, his tone still gentle, but now edged with a fine, hard steel. "You made your choices. You wanted a man who matched your ambitions, who fit into your world. I was happy to let you believe I wasn't that man. Because the truth is, my world, my ambitions, they are far, far larger than yours. And they're built on creating things, not just owning them." He turned to leave, his back straight, his steps no longer just measured but purposeful. He was walking towards a parking garage, towards his new life, which was in reality his old life, the one he had been living in secret all along. "Liam, wait," Isabella cried, her voice stripped of all its earlier confidence. It was the desperate plea of a woman watching her entire world dissolve into smoke. "We can fix this. We can talk about it. My father, he wants to work with your company." Richard, snapping out of his stupor, lunged forward. "The waterfront project. We can partner. My influence, your designs, think of what we could build." It was the desperate gambit of a man trying to turn an execution into a business meeting. Liam stopped at the curb, just before the crosswalk. He turned his head, looking back at them one last time. The sun caught his face, and the weariness was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. "Richard," he said, his voice now carrying the effortless authority of a man who commanded legions. "Your company is leveraged to the breaking point. Your technology is outdated. And your business model is based on who you know, not what you can do. Ethelred doesn't need partners like that. As for your project, Ms. Reed, my COO, reviewed your proposal 2 months ago. She advised me to decline. I agreed. He paused, letting the words sink in. She found your company to be, in her words, a project, not a partner. He used Richard's own insult, turning it back on him like a perfectly polished mirror. In that mirror, Richard Thorne saw his own reflection for what it was, an arrogant, obsolete old man about to be crushed by the future. Then, Liam's gaze softened as it fell on Isabella. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, abiding sadness. "Goodbye, Isabella," he said. And in those 2 words, she heard the final, irrevocable closing of a door. He wasn't just leaving her. He was releasing her. He was letting her go to face the consequences of her own choices in a world that she had just discovered was infinitely more complex and unforgiving than she had ever imagined. He turned and walked across the street. He didn't run. He didn't look back. He entered the concrete labyrinth of the parking garage, disappearing from their lives as quietly as he had lived within them. Isabella stood frozen on the sidewalk, the sound of her own frantic heartbeat loud in her ears. Her father was muttering a litany of curses and panic calculations. The beautiful, powerful helicopter sat on the roof of the garage like a patient predator. The man she had just discarded, the man she had pitted, was about to board it and fly away to a life she couldn't even comprehend, a life he had built in the shadows of her own self-absorbed world. She had wanted a life of status, power, and wealth. She had just divorced it. The irony was so bitter, so complete, it tasted like ash in her mouth. She had taken everything, and in doing so, she had been left with nothing at all. The days that followed were a study in surreal, slow-motion collapse. For Isabella, the world did not end in a fiery explosion, but in 1,000 quiet, humiliating cuts. The first was the most immediate. As Liam's helicopter ascended, a graceful and final departure from the stage of her life, she and her father were left standing on the pavement like statues in a tragedy. The lunch at the Caspian was, of course, forgotten. Richard, his face a ghastly shade of gray, spent the entire car ride back to his office not speaking to her, but furiously whispering to a series of lawyers and financial advisors on his phone. The words she could make out were terrifying: exposure, due diligence, hostile, ruin. Isabella went home. But home was now a foreign concept. The sprawling, minimalist house that had been her palace, her symbol of arrival, now felt like a museum of her own colossal ignorance. Every object in it was tainted. The sleek Italian sofa, the abstract painting in the foyer, the Sub-Zero refrigerator stocked with champagne. She had seen them as trophies of her sophisticated taste. Now she saw them as trinkets Liam had allowed her to play with. She wandered through the cavernous rooms, the silence pressing in on her. She had won this house in the divorce, but the deed was in her name, while the soul of the place, its very design, belonged to the man she had cast out. The irony was a physical presence, a ghost that followed her from room to room. Her social life, the bedrock of her existence, began to crumble within 48 hours. The story of the helicopter in the parking lot spread through their elite circle like a virus. At first, it was whispered as a bizarre, unbelievable rumor. But it was quickly followed by the undeniable fact that Thorne International, Richard's company, had been publicly denied a partnership on the city's massive waterfront redevelopment project. The official press release from the Ethelred Consortium was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. It spoke of a divergence in corporate culture and long-term vision. Everyone who mattered understood the code. Thorne International was old news. Ethelred was the future. And Liam, the quiet, awkward man they had all politely ignored at parties, was Ethelred. Isabella's phone, usually buzzing with invitations and gossip, fell silent. When she tried to call her friends, the calls went to voicemail. The few she did manage to speak to were awkward and distant. The power dynamics had shifted. She was no longer Isabella Thorne, daughter of a titan and wife of a charming but useless artist. She was Isabella, the woman who had divorced the ghost king of their world. She was not a figure of power, but an object of morbid curiosity and, worse, pity. Her affair with Julian, the flashy investment banker she had been seeing, evaporated overnight. Julian had been attracted to her status, to the power projected by the Thor name. When it became clear that the name was now associated with a monumental business failure and a spectacular personal misjudgment, his ardor cooled instantly. He called her, his voice slick with false sympathy. "Izzy, darling, I heard about this situation," he'd said. "Absolutely brutal. Listen, this quarter is just insane for me. I'm going to be underwater for weeks. Let's touch base when things settle down." She never heard from him again. He was a creature of opportunity, and she was no longer an opportunity. She was a liability. The most painful schism, however, was with her own family. Her father, consumed by his collapsing business, treated her with a cold, simmering rage. In his mind, it was her fault. She had brought this nobody into their lives, and her failure to recognize his true value had led directly to his ruin. Their conversations became short, brutal exchanges of blame. Did he ever talk about his work? Richard had snarled at her during one late-night confrontation in his study, the room smelling of whiskey and desperation. In all those years, all those nights he was doodling, you never once thought to ask what he was actually doing. "He told me he was a consultant," she had cried, tears of frustration streaming down her face. "He said he helped other firms with design problems. How was I supposed to know he owned the firms? Because you were his wife." Richard roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "Your one job was to know your husband, and you failed. You were so busy preening for your socialite friends that you missed the fact that you were married to the most powerful man in our industry." Her mother, Eleanor, was no better. Her concern was not for the financial collapse, but the social one. "Were people saying, Isabella," she would whisper, her voice trembling. "The women at the club, they look away when I walk in. They're laughing at us." Eleanor's world was a fragile ecosystem of appearances, and a scandal of this magnitude was a killing frost. The only member of her family who showed her any kindness was her younger brother, Marcus. Marcus was the silent enabler from the Jason, but I want to give him more depth. He was quieter than the rest of his family, an observer. He ran the philanthropic arm of the Thorn Foundation, a position his father considered soft and unimportant. Marcus had always liked Liam. He had seen the quiet intelligence his family had missed, had enjoyed long conversations with him about history and philosophy while the rest of the family talked about money. He had watched the family's treatment of Liam with a growing sense of unease, but he had never spoken up, cowed by his father's domineering personality. A week after the divorce, Marcus came to the house. He found Isabella sitting in the enormous living room, staring at a blank television screen. She looked small and lost in the vast space. He sat down next to her, not on the sofa, but on the floor, a gesture that broke the formality of the room. "I'm sorry, he said quietly. "For what?" she asked, her voice hollow. "For my epic, life-destroying stupidity." "No," he said. "I'm sorry I never said anything. I saw how they treated him, how we treated him. I liked him. I knew he was different, deeper than we gave him credit for. I should have defended him." "What good would it have done?" she murmured. "Dad would have shouted you down. I would have ignored you." "Maybe," Marcus admitted, "but at least I would have been able to look myself in the mirror. And maybe you would have listened. Just a little." He looked around the room. "This was never you, Izzy. You used to love hiking. You painted, remember? You were passionate and fiery. Then you met Dad's expectations, and you became this, a curator of a life you didn't even build." His words were gentle, but they pierced through the layers of her self-delusion more effectively than her father's rage. She started to weep, not the frustrated tears of before, but deep, shuddering sobs of genuine grief. Grief for the man she had lost, yes, but also for the woman she had lost along the way. Meanwhile, Liam's life underwent a different kind of transformation. For him, it was not a creation but a convergence. The two halves of his life, the secret, powerful architect and the quiet, humble husband, were finally merging into one. He spent the first few days not in a boardroom, but at a remote site in a mountain range a few hours from the city. It was the location for the public library he was designing, his passion project. The Ethelred Consortium was funding it entirely. He walked the land with the site foreman, his worn tweed jacket replaced by a rugged field coat, his hands tracing the lines of the landscape. He felt grounded, connected. His team, led by the formidable Evelyn Reed, handled the fallout from the revelation. Evelyn was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp gray eyes and a mind like a steel trap. She had been Liam's first ever hire, his partner in building the consortium from the ground up. She was his gatekeeper, his strategist, and his fiercest defender. She had watched his marriage with a quiet, disapproving patience, trusting him to know when it was time to end the charade. "The press is having a field day," she told him over a video call, her image crisp on his tablet as he sat on a rock overlooking a valley. "The reclusive billionaire's secret life narrative is playing very well. Thor International stock has fallen by 60%. Richard is trying to call you. I've blocked his numbers." "Good," Liam said, his focus on the valley below. "Any word from Isabella?" Evelyn's expression softened. "Her brother, Marcus, reached out. To me, not to you. He wanted to know if there was anything he could do, not for his father, but to atone." That was the word he used. Liam was silent for a moment. "What did you tell him?" "I told him atonement starts with action. I told him the Thorn Foundation's charitable status is under review due to some of his father's less than ethical accounting practices. I suggested that if he truly wants to make a difference, he should start by cleaning his own house." "That was harsh, Evelyn," Liam said, though there was a hint of a smile in his voice. "The situation called for clarity, not comfort, Liam," she retorted. "Besides, I have a feeling the boy has more spine than the rest of his family combined. He might just do it." Liam knew she was right. He had always seen a spark of his own integrity in Marcus. The weeks turned into a month. The initial shock wave of the revelation began to subside, replaced by the long, slow work of rebuilding. For the Thorns, it was a painful downward spiral. Richard was forced to sell off huge portions of his company just to service his debts. He became a ghost in his own industry, a cautionary tale whispered about at cocktail parties. For Isabella, the process was different. After her conversation with Marcus, something within her shifted. She sold a house, the grand, empty monument to her failure. She used the money, which, legally, was hers, to pay off the remaining debts her father couldn't cover, an act that stunned him into silence. It wasn't enough to save his company, but it was enough to save him from total ruin. It was an act of grace he hadn't earned but desperately needed. Then, she disappeared. She left the city, left her old life behind completely. She took with her only a few personal belongings and the small, almost forgotten canvases from her art school days that Marcus had found packed away in a storage unit. Liam, through Evelyn, kept a discreet, distant watch. He made sure her father's creditors didn't hound her. He made sure she was safe, but he didn't interfere. He knew her journey was her own. One afternoon, 6 months after the divorce, Evelyn walked into his office. Liam's office wasn't the ostentatious suite one might expect. It was a large, light-filled room at the top of the Ethelred building, but it was more of a workshop than a corporate throne room. Blueprints covered one wall, models of future projects sat on long tables, and books were stacked everywhere. "A package came for you," Evelyn said, placing a simple cardboard box on his desk. No return address, but the postmark is from a small town in the Pacific Northwest. Liam looked at the box. He knew instantly who it was from. He carefully cut the tape and opened it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a painting. It was a landscape, a view of a rugged coastline under a stormy sky. It was raw, powerful, and full of emotion. It was also, he noted with a professional's eye, incredibly well executed. The use of light and shadow was masterful. At the bottom of the box was a simple, handwritten note. "Liam, I think you would like the architecture of the trees here. They bend, but they don't break. I'm learning from them. I am sorry for everything. I hope the work is good. Isabella." Liam held the note for a long time. He looked at the painting, then back at the note. "I hope the work is good." It was the first time she had ever acknowledged his work, his true life, with understanding. It was an apology, a release, and a sign of her own rebirth. He walked over to the wall in his office that was reserved for his most prized possessions. It held not awards or accolades, but things that mattered to him. A framed sketch by his mentor, a photograph of his late parents, a child's drawing sent from a community his firm had helped rebuild after a flood. He found an empty space. "Evelyn," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Could you have this framed for me?" He placed the painting in the empty space on the wall. It belonged there. It was a piece of his past, redeemed, a story of a storm weathered, and of something new and stronger growing in its place. The final act of the drama played out not in a boardroom or a law office, but in the quiet, unassuming office of the Thorn Foundation. Marcus had taken Evelyn's words to heart. He had conducted a thorough, ruthless audit of his family's foundation, uncovering years of his father's creative accounting, funds diverted, projects promised but never delivered. He exposed it all, first to the board, and then, when they tried to cover it up, to the authorities. It was a betrayal of his family in the most profound sense, but an act of deep integrity. It completed the ruin of the Thorn name, but it saved the foundation itself. Under Marcus's new leadership, it was restructured, stripped of its vanity projects, and refocused on genuine, impactful work. One day, Marcus received a call. It was from Evelyn Reed. "Mr. Thorn," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "The Ethelred Consortium is launching a new global initiative to fund sustainable housing in underserved communities. We are looking for an independent, nonprofit partner to administer the grants and oversee the projects on the ground. Your newly reformed foundation has come to our attention. We would like to propose a preliminary partnership." Marcus was speechless. The grant they were offering was more than his foundation's entire previous annual budget. It was a lifeline, a chance to build something real and lasting from the ashes of his family's legacy. "Ms. Reed, why us?" he finally managed to ask. "After everything, Mr. L believes in second chances," Evelyn said simply. "But he also believes they must be earned. Your recent actions have demonstrated a commitment to the kind of integrity we value. The work is what matters, Mr. Thorn. Liam has always believed that. It seems you do too." And so, the story came full circle. Liam, the man they had tried to diminish, became the silent, unseen architect of their redemption. He didn't offer a handout. He offered a chance to work, to build, to create something of value. It was the only kind of help he had ever known how to give. Months later, on a clear, cold day, Liam stood on a windy overlook, staring at the completed library. It was a masterpiece of glass, steel, and locally sourced wood, a structure that seemed to grow organically from the mountainside. It was open to the public now, and even from a distance, he could see people moving inside, their forms small against the grand scale of the architecture. He felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. This was real. This mattered. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. It was a photo of a completed housing unit in a remote village, a family standing proudly in front of their new, safe home. The caption read, "The work is good." Liam smiled. He looked out at the valley, at the library that stood as a testament to his vision, and he felt a profound sense of peace. He had lost a marriage, but he had regained himself. He had faced humiliation, but he had held onto his dignity. He had been offered a chance for revenge, but had chosen the path of quiet, constructive grace. The wind whipped around him, clean and cold. He zipped up his old, comfortable jacket. The world was large, and there was still so much to build. And that's where we leave him. It's a story about wealth and power, yes, but I think it's about something more. It's about the difference between what we have and who we are. Liam's true wealth wasn't in his bank account. It was in his talent, his integrity, and his unwavering belief in the power of his work. The Thorns lost everything when they lost their money and status because that was all they had. Liam had everything, even when they thought he had nothing. What do you think? Is true revenge found in destroying your enemies? Or is it found in building a life so good that they become irrelevant? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It's a question worth pondering. Thank you for staying with me on this journey. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories like this. Until next time, remember to look beyond the surface. The quietest people often have the most to say.